This is Find Your Dream Job, the podcast that helps you get hired, have the career you want, and make a difference in life. I'm your host, Mac Pritchard. I'm also the founder of Mac's List. It's a job board in the Pacific Northwest that helps you find a fulfilling career. Every Wednesday, I talk to a different expert about the tools you need to get the work you want. Find Your Dream Job is brought to you by Top Resume. Top Resume has helped more than 400,000 professionals land more interviews and get hired faster. Get a free review of your resume today. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. When a new industry appears, it offers not only new jobs, but opportunities for career change and swift promotion too. This is happening today in the cannabis industry, which is growing dramatically. Ryan Rosenfeld joins us to talk about how you can find a job in cannabis. Ryan is the president of Green Force Staffing. It's a full-service employment agency for the cannabis industry, and he joins us today from Portland, Oregon. Ryan, here's where I'd like to start. How does the cannabis industry vary across the United States right now?
Great question, Mac. It's a state-to-state issue. It's basically been localized, regionalized, however you want to kind of describe that, into microcosms of industry. It's going to be handled, obviously, federally. Cannabis is still a federally controlled substance. It's a hot topic, one that I think we're going to see in the upcoming election cycle be debated. But I think, from a job standpoint, from a legalization standpoint, from an industry standpoint, it all boils down to a state-by-state level. And that's controlled in many different facets. Here in Oregon, so to say, which legalized in 2016, it was a free market, an open market. People were able to, it was low barrier of entry. Whoever wanted to kind of toss their hat into the ring from, a business standpoint was able to. And it is not that way, across the rest of the country, which can be good or bad, depending on how you look at it.
What was surprising to me when I was preparing for this conversation was how few states now where marijuana is, or cannabis rather, is not allowed at a state level. As you say, it's illegal federally, but there are less than a dozen states now where cannabis doesn't exist in some legal form. Isn't that right, Ryan?
Correct. Yes. My most recent, conversation research, I want to say there's only 3 states in the union that do not allow or do not have some sort of medical or recreational or adult use program. There's been a little bit of a moniker change from recreational, since it sounds like too much fun in this kind of, legalization era, and they've kind of shifted that wordage to adult use. But I believe the 3 states are Idaho, South Dakota, or I'm not sure if it's South or North Dakota, and Mississippi.
Do you see parallels, Ryan, with other industries like technology, for example, that emerged dramatically in the past with cannabis?
Absolutely. I think that's a great comment. I think in my lifetime, I was born in the late 70s. There's how many industrial revolutions do we have left, right? I think we have, that I'm aware of. Technology has kind of been ongoing. It's ever evolving, ever going. But that it's on my horizon, cannabis and alternative energy, solar power has been around. But, from a state standpoint, from a federal standpoint, massive amounts of job creation, massive amounts of new taxable revenue streams that are going to be very applicable in, the coming months and years in this kind of post-pandemic, world that we're living in.
What kind of opportunities for careers and job seekers are you seeing in cannabis as the industry grows?
We're seeing the entire spectrum. It's a brand new industry. In a sense it is, right? Because you've got states like Oregon, which has, I think, one of the second oldest medical programs. So Oregon has had a medical cannabis program since 1998. California's always had a big, medical program. So they're the states that have kind of operated in these shadow industries, so to speak, where there's been a lot of, risk reward for some of these kind of cultivation style jobs. As we're approaching this new, privatization, legalization era of the adult use market, you're seeing everything from low-end agriculture, cultivation, processing, all the way up to, kind of, manufacturing jobs, light industrial, going up into the C-suites. So there's quite a number of opportunities, which makes it very enticing. And I think it's, a reason why a number of people are interested, by it, I think, and they're hopefully listening to this podcast.
What kinds of people do you encourage to consider careers in cannabis? Because I think some listeners might think, well, I'm not interested in that product. Should they consider working in the industry, Ryan?
That's a great question. I mean, I'd say right now, those who are most passionate about it are probably, well, not always the best candidates, because some people are too passionate about it and it occasionally inhibits their work performance. But I think those that are willing to kind of, roll up their sleeves, get their hands dirty, because it is such an industry that is still a toddler, right? There's just a lot of uncertainty. We don't have all of the parameters and professional services available. There's still a number of issues hindering the industry as a whole. Banking and taxes we can go into if it's applicable. So I mean, I think there's the best candidate is somebody who is interested in the plant, interested in its potential, either as an alternative medicine, therapy, pain relief, purely from an industrial standpoint, sometimes from an investment standpoint. So I think it's going to mimic a number of other industries. It's just going to be a kind of a slower rollout and a state-by-state rollout, and at times can be difficult where to kind of find your that door to stick your foot into.
What kind of skills are you seeing are most transferable to cannabis? Because you run an employment agency, so you're placing people in jobs throughout the sector. Are there other sectors, say food or beverage, where that kind of experience most easily translates into jobs in cannabis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, from the bare bones going down to agriculture, anybody who's been in, big ag or, nursery, fruit, vegetable growing, from a cultivation standpoint, it starts with the plant, right? Which is a living being. It's grown. So anybody with ties there, it's a new cash crop, so to speak. When you're going into parallels from other industries where there's some like really easy kind of crossover, I think, craft brewing comes to mind as easily discussed. You had the craft brewing explosion. I want to say when I was in high school, kind of the Peace Wicked years, the 90s, that, followed by a little bit of a downturn. And then, most recently, especially in the Pacific Northwest, I know for sure Portland's a very big beer town. You're seeing a lot of parallels where it's just kind of, craft, individual, unique, curated, this farm to table mentality. But so what are the jobs that best, what are those skill sets that transfer over the best? Any professional skill sets from accounting, bookkeeping, all those are going to, they're needed in every industry. Sales, marketing, creatives, is a big opportunity right now. Because it is a new industry, because it is an industry that's dabbled with the counterculture. I think they're a little bit more experimental when it comes to, kind of client or consumer reaching messages, which is exciting.
Are there jobs that you can't fill because of high demand in cannabis, either at your own employment agency or you're seeing are hard to fill across the sector?
Yeah. To answer your question, yes. I mean, right now, specifically in Portland, we went from, an unemployment rate of, I want to say less than 3%. So it was very difficult to find kind of some of these, lower, starting kind of entry level positions. Since the pandemic, since COVID-19, with the unemployment packages where it's been over the last couple months, it's been in the unemployment rate rising. It's actually been just as hard to get people to work. I think there's also some minor limitations when it comes to licensing in Oregon. Cannabis is monitored by the Oregon Liquor Commission, the OLCC. There is a worker permit that's associated with it. There's a minor background check. I think it's $100 permitting licensing fee. It's good for 5 years. So it's not a big obstacle, but it is an obstacle. And I think one of the, items that we've been focused on is, okay, how do we, find candidates, people who have been potentially prosecuted or victims of the war on drugs, and kind of rehabilitate them back into mainstream, society, employment, industry, in an industry that they were persecuted upon, which is this kind of funny little cycle.
Many people who have a felony conviction struggle with unemployment, and that conviction could come from many sources and happen for many reasons. Is having a record a barrier to working in cannabis?
Yes and no. I mean, if it's violent crime, I've off the top of my head, I do not know what where the line is drawn. But having cannabis misdemeanor, nonviolent crime, there is a statute of limitations on years. But there are a number of programs. I know there are here in the city, and actually there's a city funded program doling out expungement clinics, helping people looking to get in the industry, helping them actually expunge, prior crimes.
And I want to talk about how to break into the industry in a moment, Ryan. But one last question for people who haven't worked in cannabis in the past: is there any stigma associated with these jobs and working in this sector?
Yeah, it depends on where you live. I think that stigma is changing. I think it's ever evolving. In my lifetime, I wasn't really sure if I'd see legalization happen. I think, depending on the part of the country you live in, I've lived, from the Philadelphia area originally. I've lived in Manhattan. I've been in Portland for close to 20 years. In Portland, there's no stigma, but the genie's kind of out of the bottle. But, if I were to move to potentially, Rust Belt or central the country where maybe it's not as progressive, mindset, and I was in an industry that was predominantly, conservative, occasionally there's still going to be some, people that are a little hesitant to, put that work experience on a resume or LinkedIn or so on and so forth. I think it's dissolving pretty rapidly and pretty quickly. To me, it feels like the genie is out of the bottle. It's not going back in. And I think people, the industry on a whole needs compliance. It doesn't need more cannabis people. It needs professionals.
Well, I want to pause here and take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the concrete steps you recommend people take in order to break into the cannabis industry. So stay with us. And when we come back, I'll continue my conversation with Ryan Rosenfeld of Green Force Staffing about how to find a job in cannabis. Whether you're breaking into a new business like cannabis or staying in your current sector, you need a resume that stands out. If you're not sure how to make your resume shine, the experts at Top Resume can help. Sign up today for a free resume review. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. In just 2 business days, Top Resume will give you specific suggestions about how you can make your resume better. Your free review will include ideas for improving layout and language and showcasing your skills. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. Studies show that recruiters spend about 6 seconds looking at a resume. Can you pass this test? Find out from the experts how you can improve your resume right away. Go to maxlist.org/topresume. Now, let's get back to the show. We're back in the Max List studio. I'm talking with Ryan Rosenfeld. He's the president of Green Force Staffing. It's a full-service employment agency for the cannabis industry. Now, Ryan, before the break, we were talking about the industry itself and the opportunities that are available and some of the issues you might encounter, not only here in the Pacific Northwest, but across the country, and the opportunities too. Let's talk about how to break into cannabis. What's the first step you recommend people take?
The first step that people need to take is education, immersion into the industry, about the plant. Going in with as much knowledge, I think, is beneficial. Because it is a startup industry, there are a number of opportunities available. But at times, people are seeing this as a career change. Maybe they have to take 1 step back before taking 2 steps forward. So I think, educating, networking, What I did, prior to launching Green Force was to engage in as many of the local associations, trade associations, industry networking events as possible. I'd recommend anybody listening to this podcast, based on what state you're in, just do a quick Google search, Facebook groups. I'm sure there's some trade associations, maybe some pertaining to, finding a job, maybe some job boards. Maybe there's some staffing temp agencies similar to ours as a great place to kind of break in. But I'd recommend, exposing yourself as you would, in any industry, trying to surround yourself with those that are, decision makers or brand, reps, so you can kind of have a feel. Does that make sense?
It does. And is there, I suppose it depends on your skills and your profession, but do you see people start at a certain spot, Ryan, when they want to break in? Once they do this networking and this research?
Yes. I mean, I'd say more times than not, a lot of people come in wanting to be a master grower, so to speak. I'm making air quotes. You can't see it. What does that take? A lot of people want to be touching the plant, it's amazing. It's a beautiful plant. It smells amazing. And I think that is something that is really hard to capture without, hours. You need to be around it. You need to be touching it. And it's hard to have access based on the state you're in. It's still federally illegal. The state might not have access to it. When I was learning about the plant in the early days, it was, message boards, forums, learning how to grow online, and then kind of applying it in your own home garden. When you go back to where is a great place to start? Some people start at the very bottom. They'll come in and do some kind of, agricultural harvesting, trimming, bucking. And these are all just kind of various jobs or, duties, skills, actions around the cultivation and harvesting of the plant. If you think about, kind of cannabis, and you kind of correlate it, say, with corn, right? How many times a year do you eat corn on the cob? A couple times a year. But how many times do you have a product that has corn in it? Multiple times a week. And you can kind of look at cannabis in that kind of lens as well, as there's a huge myriad of options as far as getting engaged with it, touching it, and ways to kind of be employed by it. And it's just kind of, how do you find that initial spot? And hopefully I can help you answer that question.
What if you're looking for a professional position? And you mentioned this before the break, that there's high demand in the industry for managers, accountants, financial professionals. What's your advice for somebody who might be working in a completely different sector, who has those skills, who wants to work in cannabis?
Calming. I think, they should kind of reach out to, there's a number of job boards that are specific to cannabis that have kind of sprung up over the last 4 or 5 years. Those are not bad places to start. You're going to find a number of positions, based on the state. If you look at any state that has an adult use program that has, a pretty significant economy or population, Massachusetts, Michigan, Nevada, California is obviously a large one. There's going to be a number of opportunities for kind of, professional, careers and professional skill sets to kind of make that switch over. I would start looking at some of those job boards, local, national, and even international, and start there. I'd also start by just kind of looking at the preeminent brands that you have. Who are the big employers? Who looks like they're doing a good job? Who's spending a lot of money on marketing? Who's always hiring? And just kind of start fine tuning your list, and kind of maybe reaching out to some of them on some of the job boards.
You mentioned earlier, as a parallel industry, craft brewing, and in that sector, there is a lot of training and education for people who not only want to learn how to brew beer, but market it and sell it and build businesses in that world. Are you seeing similar training and education programs emerge in cannabis, Ryan?
Our goal is to mirror that exactly. Yes. I mean, I think there's still a lot of, not unknown, but there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of information still to be kind of had within the industry. People are, how do you kind of access this? It's something that's difficult to do virtually, but it is, people are creating and curating online content for this type of education. And again, it's, at what point are you trying to engage with it? Are you trying to engage with it from a financial standpoint? Are you a CFO, accountant, bookkeeper, where there's some, tricky kind of, laws that are specific to cannabis that are not, commonplace. It's not apples to apples with other industries. If you're plant touching, say retail associate, bud tender, you have to kind of, familiarize yourself with some of the strains, the terpenes, potency, testing parameters. If you're on the cultivation side, many of the cultivation methods, and it's like, there's a million ways to skin the cat. And it's why it's kind of nice to be exposed to all of them, which is one of the advantages I have is we work with a number of the different growers, producers, processors, cultivators all across the state. And I get to kind of just immerse myself into it and see best practices from each angle.
You talked about the many applications of cannabis and the different products out there. And how important is it in this industry, Ryan, to focus on one niche, say retail, for example, or growing? Does that matter, or do you see people who work across the industry?
Man, that's a great question, Mac. It can be a state to state issue, right? There's going to be, depending on the way the licensing is going to work, distribution within the state. Sometimes, we'll call it vertical integration, right? So, in Oregon, it's all under different licenses, but there can be, one umbrella company who has, 20 retail shops, 3 grows, a processing place. And, based in you grow it at the one spot, you'll process it for edibles, tinctures, extracts, topicals at the other place. They'll all go to the retail to be sold to the consumer. So it's sometimes it's advantageous. You're taking a bigger swing. It's a bigger bite. There's more people to manage. There's more business, little micro businesses to manage. The people that do it well do very well, but it adds certain layers of complications at times.
What mistakes do you see people make who want to break into cannabis? What are some common errors to avoid?
Trying to go too big too fast, I think is the most common error that I see. It's not always 2 + 2 = 4. Things aren't always exactly linear. The way, that's how it calculated in Excel, but that's not always how it kind of works when it comes to, working with a living organism. Plants are living things, and there's so many variables within the industry. There's so many odds and ends, pests, disease, mold, mildew, that can cause a massive wrinkle. So I think it's good to kind of have a proof of concept, vet it out, figure out what's working, and then kind of go from there. Because as you get bigger, and say you're a vertical integrated organization, all those little disruptions, variables can cause ripples in each sector and kind of spread across the entire organization. And I've seen people go belly up very quick that had no intention to, just due to overextension.
What about the people, job seekers, Ryan, who don't want to start their own growing operation, but want to work in the industry when they're trying to switch from one sector to cannabis? Are there common errors you see people make in trying to make that change as job seekers?
I think some people just think because they've been users, that they're going to make a great employee. The old joke goes that everybody wants to work in the cannabis industry until they realize that's actual work. So I think people getting into it for the wrong reasons, people with, greed, or they think it's just, dollar signs, like it's the Wild West, that you can kind of do whatever you want. I think those people, those candidates, job seekers, have the toughest transition. I think people that are looking to kind of go in, and sometimes, in our industry, we're seeing people, they want fresh slates. They don't want anybody with prior cannabis experience, actually, which initially is kind of counterproductive, but, old habits die hard.
And why is that? Why do some employers not want people with prior cannabis experience? Because as you said at the beginning, some states have had legal operations now for 1 or even 2 decades.
Yeah, or many decades. I think it's because of, the way that the black and gray market was run. There was no HR department. There was no workers' comp insurance. It's been a counterculture industry, so to speak, in a number of ways that came with some baggage. And people, and when they're putting multi-million-dollar investments on the line, and they have SOPs and practices and best practices, and their cultivation method that is tied to their scheduling and timeline and forecasting for sales, they need things done their way, right? They'll bring in a consultant occasionally if they need some nips and tucks and tweaks, to try and, increase potency or increase yield. But, they don't need people tinkering with their product. Coca-Cola is not going to bring somebody in, to the manufacturing line and have them suggesting, some new additions to their formula. So it's more along the lines of that.
So is this a business, Ryan, that welcomes professionals who want to change careers and come from another sector like food or beverage and work in cannabis?
Absolutely. Yes. I think a number of the professionals, the working professionals in the cannabis industry are longing for other people to kind of make the switch. I think it's the time is now. I think you're going to see a number of states that have just medical programs that are lacking the adult use programs in this kind of post-pandemic era that are the state coffers have been drained with unemployment. They see this tax money coming in for schools, for roads, et cetera. I think you're going to see a number of states picking it up, which is great. You're going to see a number of jobs increasing. And eventually when federal legalization happens, you're going to see, some bigger brands kind of, rise to the top.
Well, I've enjoyed our conversation, Ryan. Now tell us what's next for you.
Going back to work, busy trying to grow Green Force. We're right now based in Portland, Oregon, servicing the entire state of Oregon, trying to determine our best foot forward for expansion into other states. Very excited about the future for both the industry and the company. So, just kind of back to the grind.
Well, Ryan, given all the great advice you've shared today, what's the one thing you want a listener to remember about how to find a job in the cannabis industry?
Get engaged, get educated, find yourself, find what you want to do, find where you want to go, and take the step.
Is it time for a second opinion about your resume? Get it reviewed for free by Top Resume. Go to maxlist.org/top resume. And make sure you never miss an episode of Find Your Dream Job. Sign up for our free podcast newsletter. You'll get information about our guests, links to job search tools, and a transcript of every show. Go to maxlist.org/show notes. Again, that's maxlist.org/show notes. Next week, our guest will be Dana Pratt. She's worked as a human resources director for companies like Macy's and New Seasons. When you look for a job, it can be hard to reach people inside a human resources department. But Dana says there's often a side door at HR. She and I will talk about how you can find it and use it during your job search. I hope you'll join us. Until next time, thanks for letting us help you find your dream job.